Those of you who know me, or probably you may already be aware of, but even then it probably doesn't surprise you that I'm a big fan of Bojangles. And in fact, over time, I'm becoming a bigger fan of Bojangles. And in truth, I like everything that Bojangles has. I love their biscuits. I like plain biscuits. I like all the stuff that they put on their biscuits. I like their chicken. They've got great sides. I mean, some of you are like, "Oh, I love pinto beans." I don't care anything about pinto beans, but I love their Cajun pintos. They're delicious. They've got really good slaw. They even have really good, I don't know if you've ever had the green beans at Bojangles, but Bojangles has really good seasoned green beans. And I like everything that they have. In fact, I would say to you that I like, and in fact, this perhaps best communicates how much I like Bojangles. I like Bojangles so much that I go back in spite of the service. And if you've ever been to a Bojangles, you kind of know what I'm talking about. And in fact, with the exception of the Bojangles in Rockingham, there's a Bojangles in Rockingham that's got, they're just a 10 on service. Virtually every other one I've been to, it's just terrible, terrible service. Most of it looks like it's court-ordered community service. And but I like it so much, I still go back, and I don't go being surprised by bad service. I really don't. I just kind of view it as an extra side, right? So I'll have the the two-piece combo with the bow rounds and the bad service. You just kind of expect that it just kind of goes all together. That being said, and I suppose perhaps I shouldn't, but I'll go ahead and name names. The location over here on Stanley Road is really, really testing my love for Bojangles. It has pushed it to the brink. I mean, for one thing, in terms of service, if the employees were any slower, I promise you, they'd be in reverse. It's that bad. I mean, no one is in a hurry. No one's in a hurry. So everything is slow. But I'm telling you, the thing that has really, really pressed my buttons is this. Not once, but twice, I have been there, and they were out of something. Now, there's some things that you wouldn't be surprised if a restaurant runs out of. For example, I've been to places before where, there was a massive group or some event was in town and maybe they ran out of ice. That can happen. There hasn't been enough time to make ice. Or they could say, in that case, it's the place that sells a lot of fried chicken. We've had a run on chicken. We're kind of out right now. It's going to be a little bit. Or maybe they're out of tenders. Those come frozen, so you've got a limited supply of those. If you had a run, that could kind of explain it. But not once, twice, we have been there, and they have run out of not ice, not chicken. They've run out of ketchup. Well, for one thing, I can't stand going to restaurants where you have to ask for ketchup, right? And they'll give you like one at a time, and it's like a Mother May I game. Well, can I please have two? Okay. And so they dole it out pack by pack. But twice we have been there, and they said, "I'm sorry, we don't have any ketchup." I'm like, how can you be a fast food restaurant that serves fries and not have ketchup? In fact, if you're a fast food restaurant, you ought to have so much ketchup that there's like a room for it, because people eat ketchup on all kinds of stuff. At Bojangles, you put it on the fries, you put it on the bow rounds, some would put it on their biscuits, some would put it on eggs, some would put it on a steak biscuit. You put it on all kinds of stuff. How can you run out of ketchup? And so, like, if somebody says to me, "Hey, I'm going today for lunch and I'm going to go to Bojangles, I think I'll just go to that one over there," I'm like, I don't want to do that. That place is so poorly run, they even run out of ketchup. And so at least from me, that's the message that is going out about that location. And if you are a restaurant, specifically a fast food restaurant, I'd like to think that's kind of the wrong message to be going out about you, isn't it? There's all these kinds of things that you'd want to be known for, but to have something as basic as that's the wrong message that's going out. I want you to be aware of the fact that not simply as an individual, but as individuals who are parts of groups, whether that's your family, whether it's your company, whether it's some other organization, but even, and of concern for us today, is specifically you and your connection with this church, there are things that we are known for. There are messages that are being conveyed about us. There are things that are being said of us. And there are things that can be said of this church that would absolutely be the wrong message. And this is what I want you to think with me about for a bit this morning, and that's this. What makes it likely for the wrong message to go out? What creates the environment so that the wrong things, that the wrong message is communicated about us as a fellowship? We see the answer to that question today in 1 Corinthians chapter 5. 1 Corinthians chapter 5, if you'd join me there, we're going to start reading with verse 1. As you're turning there, let me set the stage for you. The city of Corinth is not small. It is a city that numbers between slave and free about 700,000 at this point. It's one of the cultural centers of the Roman Empire. And it is a place that is steeped in at least religious awareness. So people are thinking religious thoughts, though unfortunately most of it is pagan, but at least they're thinking on that front. And so it is likely, or not likely, but this makes it in some ways very fertile soil for the message of Jesus to go out. And so this is one of the places where God had sent the Apostle Paul to begin the process of sharing with people and building relationships and having conversations and sharing with them the hope that he had come to discover in Christ. And so you have a group of believers that has come to exist, and they begin to form a fellowship. Paul is the first leader. He's the one that God is using to guide the formation of this fellowship. And so it's a church that is in a great situation. They got enormous population. They've got people that at least are thinking religiously, so it's not like even though they're not Christian and they're not thinking Godward thoughts, at least God of the Bible thoughts, at least they're in that realm. In many ways, this is very fertile soil. This is an environment that is ripe for the gospel to take off. And it's ripe for a church, for a fellowship to be experiencing amazing usefulness in God's hands. All right, so with that being said, we read what Paul says here beginning in verse 1. Now bear in mind, Paul is not indifferent to these people. They're not distantly known by him. He has spent significant amounts of time with them, perhaps been there as they lost loved ones, maybe preached their mama's funeral, that he has led them or their children to Jesus. He has a deep personal stake in their life and in the life of this fellowship. And he's concerned because this is a church that is very much in peril. They don't know it. There are some mortal wounds that this church is experiencing. And so Paul writes this letter in part to address those and try to right the ship. And so he says, beginning in verse 1 of chapter 5, it's reported that there is sexual immorality among you, and the kind of sexual immorality that is not even tolerated among the Gentiles. A man is sleeping with his father's wife. And you're arrogant. Shouldn't you be filled with grief and remove from your congregation the one who did this? Even though I'm absent in the body, I'm present with you in spirit. As one who is present with you in this way, I have already pronounced judgment on the one who's been doing such a thing. When you're assembled in the name of our Lord Jesus, and I am with you in spirit, with the power of our Lord Jesus, hand that one over to Satan for the destruction of the flesh, so that his spirit may be saved in the day of the Lord. Your boasting is not good. Don't you know that a little leaven leavens the whole batch of dough? Clean out the old leaven, so that you may be a new, unleavened batch, as indeed you are. For Christ, our Passover lamb, has been sacrificed, and let us therefore observe the feast, not with old leaven, or with the leaven of malice and evil, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. And there's a ton of stuff that Paul says in this passage that we're not going to have time to unpack today, but this is what I want you again to think about, because I believe in part this passage, this text answers the question, what is it that makes it likely for the wrong message to go out about a fellowship? For us today, what is it that makes for Gate City likely for the wrong thing to be said of us? Pay attention to what he says in verse 1. He says, it is actually reported. It is actually reported that something is going on. and what's going on. He's saying there's sexual immorality. But it's not simply that there is sexual immorality, but it's the kind of sexual immorality that's not practiced among the Gentiles. We've talked about this before, that sometimes the word Gentile in the New Testament is meaning non-Jew. Sometimes it's talking about those that are outside the faith, those that are not followers of Jesus, and that's how Paul is using that here. So there is sexual immorality that you don't even find among lost people. So there's people that they don't care anything about Jesus. They're not thinking anything about God. And in the absence of that, they're living their lives absent a type of immorality that's found in the church. And he gives some specific details. He says that you've got a man with his father's wife, and there is some debate as to exactly what this means. Does it mean that this is actually an incestuous relationship with his own biological mother? It could be. Or it could be that his mother has died, his father has remarried, and so there is still this incestuous relationship with what is now his father's wife. In either case, this is way, way, way out of bounds. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that you don't even see on All My Children. And Paul is saying it's not just that it's found, but it's found in the fellowship. So among people that have no connection with God, you don't see this type of thing. But here, the place that's got the cross out on the steeple, the one that's where people have the truths of God being shared supposedly on a regular basis, this type of thing is found here. And pay attention to what he says. Again, verse 1, it is actually reported. That begs a question. When Paul says it is reported, he is conveying this idea, I have heard. So the question is, where is Paul? Paul is in Ephesus at this point. Does that matter? Yes, it matters. Why? Consider the distance between these two places. If you're to travel by land between Corinth and Ephesus, it's 941 miles. That would be like going from here to Houston, Texas. By foot, by goat, whatever you want to ride, 941 miles is a long way. But you could say, instead of going by goat, I want to go by boat. By boat, it's 241 miles. But in the first century, there's no motor. There's not even a trolling motor. So what the best you could hope for is some wind with a sail or a whole lot of this. And so in either case, 241 miles, closest way to get there. Still a long way away. So bear in mind, Paul is that far away, and what's going on? He hears about this. There's no email, there's no texting, there's no newspapers, there's not even the postal service. There's none of that. And that far away, Paul hears about what's going on. So what does it say? It says that a message, and the message about a fellowship is going out. But what's the message? Is the message, man, this is a church where God is at work, where God is working through His people and making a difference for both time and eternity in a massive, massive city that needs to know. Is any of that being said? No. What's the message? The message, there's a guy having an incestuous relationship with his father's wife. What? And again, it's in the church. It's in the church. So among those that are saying and identifying and saying, hey, we wear the Jesus jersey, we're followers of Christ, this is where you find that. And that's the message that is being heard that far away. The wrong message is going out. So what makes the wrong message go out? Paul identifies a couple of things, and the first is this. The wrong message is likely to go out when we're proud of the wrong things. When we're proud of the wrong things. Pay attention to what he says. He says, this is going on, and he says you're arrogant in verse 2. In verse 6, he talks about their boasting. Now, before I flesh this out, I want you to think with me about this for a moment. You're aware, hopefully, of the fact that God does not relish our pride. God is not at all, even remotely pleased in our pride that we think, I am something. I am better than others. I am lofty. I am elevated. God is not even remotely pleased by that. However, there is a sense in which, at least we in this culture and with our language, there are ways sometimes that we use the word pride in a different sense That from my perspective, I believe, at least in this particular sense, that God is okay with it. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. All right, so I've not kept it a secret that that our family is so cool that we're all learning bluegrass, right? And so Nathan is doing guitar, Andrew mandolin, Philip and I are doing banjo, Catherine is doing fiddle, Caroline is doing bass, even Peter has a fiddle about this long that you might have heard at your house and you thought, what is that awful racket? It was Peter on a fiddle about this long, just grinding on it. Anyway, we're all learning this, having a ton of fun, sincerely. About 10 days ago, I took, it was on a Thursday night, there was a bluegrass jam that was meeting at a church on the other side of town. And I took Philip and Nathan with me. And so Philip and I, we've got banjos, Nathan's got his guitar. And how a jam works, because I know, you all know how they work, right? No, you don't. Anyway, so there's about 12 people, maybe 15 that are there to play. And just kind of have a circle of chairs, and you don't really know fully what instruments are going to show up. I mean, there were a couple of basses, there were some guitars, there was a mandolin, there was a dobro. You don't know exactly what all is going to show up. And how it works is that, I don't know, somebody will say, well, you pick a song. So you pick a song, and at that point, you kick it off, and you're playing lead on it. And so once you've played lead on like the verse and the chorus, then it rotates to the next person. And so then you kind of go into rhythm while they're playing the lead. And if you know the song, or if you can play the song, then you'll take the lead. Otherwise, you'll just kind of just smile and wave and let it go to the next person. No big deal, because not everybody knows every song. Anyway, I've only been at this since December. And in the scheme of things, I've learned a lot in that time frame, but I'm not very good at all. Nobody is confusing me with Earl Scruggs. And so early on, we get there, and they've said, hey, you pick something. Okay, so I picked this song. I'm sure you all know it, Down the Road. Down the road, about a mile or two, lives a little girl named Pearly Blue. About so high, hair is brown, prettiest thing boys in this town. You all know it. Don't act dumb. Anyway. I love playing this song. It's a lot of fun. And it's one of the few things that I can play remotely presentable. But I don't play in front of people very much, and so it makes me nervous. Doing this doesn't make me nervous, but playing in front of people makes me nervous. And so I began to play, and I keep missing strings. I'm not lying. I played that night as if I'd had a stroke. I mean, it was... It's just not working. It's just not working. And so then one lady says, can you sing it? And you know what? I sang it. Oh, yeah. Signing autographs for hours afterwards. Anyway. Just played it terribly. In fact, when it came back around, hey, you picked something, I said, hey, let me have another shot at Down the Road. Again, just butchered it. The thing, though, that was a takeaway for me was watching Nathan. And Nathan's playing the guitar. Nathan's is becoming a pretty decent piano player, but he's becoming a really good rhythm guitar player as well. And there were a whole slew of songs that were played that night he had never heard before. And it's one thing to play rhythm and just know kind of where the chords were, but when the lead would rotate, he would take the lead on stuff that he's never played before, and he would actually play it correctly. And so when I got home, I told him then, but when I got home, I told Caroline, I said, I was so proud of Nathan tonight. I mean, he did so well. I mean, he was playing this stuff that he's never heard before, and he was doing it correctly. I was really proud of him. Now, when I say that, I'm not using the word proud or pride in the sense that I'm like, well, Nathan is the best thing since sliced bread, that he's better. It's not pride in terms of comparison to others. In that sense, I'm using the word pride to convey this deep-seated satisfaction. I am so pleased. I'm so deeply satisfied with something. Those of you who are parents, that there's a sense in which that you have hopefully throughout the course of your children's lives repeated instances where you're just so proud. Not because you think your children are better than any other kid, but just this deep-seated satisfaction. And I guess the best that we can use in terms of our vernacular to convey that is the word pride. If I'm wrong, I hope the Lord convicts me about this, but at least in that sense, I feel like the Lord is okay with that. Because it's not pride in terms of comparison. It's just this deep-seated satisfaction, this deep value and appreciation for this particular state. That being said, those of you that are connected and as part of the Gate City family, and I think this should be true for anybody. If you're part of a church family, it ought to be. And I recognize there can be it can look like a sine curve every once in a while, and there can be some bumps along the road. But there ought to be this deep satisfaction, this deep value that you place on being connected with and part of the church family. Specifically this church family. Doesn't mean that Gate City is better than anything or anybody or any of that. But this pride and deep satisfaction in being connected and part of the fellowship. Now, the Corinthian fellowship, there was pride. But what were they experiencing the deep satisfaction in? It's not just that there is this deep satisfaction. He says that you're arrogant. So that suggests that they're comparing themselves to others. And then he describes their boasting. Look at us. What are they arrogant about? What are they boasting about? I will very clearly answer that question. I have no idea. Paul doesn't tell us. But they're boasting. They are prideful of themselves in comparison even to other fellowships. Look at us. Look at we're so great. What would they have been prideful of? What would they have been boasting about? Well, just think for a moment what it is that churches today could be prideful of, that they could be boasting about. Well, churches can be very prideful of their numbers, can't they? You've had conversations with folks that are connected, particularly with some especially large churches. Well, we've got 19 million people at our church on Sunday. 20 million in Sunday school. So churches can boast about their numbers. They can boast about their facilities. Man, we've got the greatest worship space. And we've got the greatest children's building. We've got the greatest technology. We've got the greatest whatever. Churches can boast about their ministries. Our church has got the best, it's off the charts children's ministry compared to anything else. Man, it is so blessed good. We've got the greatest ministry to students, the greatest ministry to seniors. Our ministries are so good. I've been to one church, I'm not lying, they had the best soap. They should have bragged about it. They didn't. But they had the best soap. And you know what? We also now have that same soap. But churches, fellowships can be arrogant, they can be boasting, they can be prideful of stuff, lots of stuff. But whatever it is exactly that the Corinthian church is boasting about and prideful of, we don't know exactly what it was, but we know this. Whatever they were prideful of, it was the wrong stuff. They were boasting about and they were prideful about things that in the end did not ultimately matter, because not everything in the life of this or any other fellowship matters ultimately. Do you remember back in around 1 Samuel chapter 15? Hopefully you're familiar with this story. You've got Israel's first king is Saul, and God tells Saul to do something very specific, attack the Amalekites, and there should be utter, complete destruction of the entire nation. There should be no spoils of victory. There should be no survivors, nothing. Saul launches an attack, but he doesn't do what God said. Among other things, he spares the king and he keeps a lot of the animals. God leads Samuel, the prophet, to go and confront Saul. And as soon as Saul sees Samuel, he's like, "Hey, Saul, hey, I did exactly what God said to do." And Samuel's like, "Well, what are these animals over here? These goats, these sheep, these cattle, what are they doing over here?" Oh, those people, the troops, they brought them back. But you know what? We brought them back. These are going to be used for sacrifices. You know, we've had kind of some pitiful goats and some pitiful cows lately, but man, it is prime beef. We're not talking about choice or select. Prime beef over here. So we're going to use this. We're going to up the ante. So we can use this for sacrifice. This is, at the end of the day, this is for God. I did exactly what God said to do, and you know what? Old Agag is over here too. which you're thinking, why did Saul just kind of say this? But he does. And among other things, do you remember what Samuel says to him? If you don't, you ought to go back and read it. But he says this, that what God delights in is not offering and sacrifice, but obedience. You're saying you did all of this stuff so that you could do something in God's name, but what he's saying that ultimately matters is you just plainly doing what God has said. That something as simple as obedience, that's what God takes delight in. I really believe that what God wants, among other things, for our fellowship, in fact, for every fellowship that takes a relationship with Him and the Bible seriously, is that we get to the point where our deepest satisfaction in the church family is this, that we are doing what God said and we're useful in His hands. Everything else is details. Buildings, they don't matter. Ministries, they change over time. But what really matters, what's pleasing to God, is that we just plain do what He says and that we're useful in His hands in pointing people towards His Son. That won't happen when, for example, in the Corinthian fellowship, you've got those that are in the church family that are experiencing known, flagrant, unrepentant sin, and everybody acts like, well, there's no problem. All of our I's are dotted and T's are crossed. Everything is just fine. I've said it and I've said it repeatedly, and it's true, that we cannot preach the holiness of God and be indifferent to the response of people. We cannot. We must not. We're in this together, and what I do matters not simply to me and not simply to my family, but it matters to you. What you do matters not just to you and to your family, but it matters to all of us. This is a team sport, and together, what it is that we have to value most is this, that we're going to do individually and collectively what God said, and to be useful in His hands in reaching people, whether here or wherever they are, pointing them to Jesus. But that's not the message that was going out. A message was going out about the fellowship, but it was the wrong one. Why? Because they were proud. They found deep satisfaction, but their deep satisfaction was in the wrong things. It was in the stuff that ultimately did not matter. But you can also ensure that the wrong message will go out when we ignore the power of influence. When we ignore the power of influence. In verse 6, Paul asks a rhetorical question after saying to them that their boasting is not good. And then he says, don't you know that a little bit of leaven, just a bit of yeast, can leaven an entire batch of dough? And he says, clean out the old leaven so that you may be a new unleavened batch as you are. What he's talking about in principle is this idea of influence. And if you have an individual as part of the family that is living in known unrepentant sin, that becomes a real problem for the entirety of the body, because we are all easily influenced. Now, all too often we forget that, or we will ignore that. We will think of ourselves, and in particular in American culture, we celebrate rugged individualism, and I'm my own person, I'm my own man, and nobody tells me what to do. I'm free, I do whatever I want, I think my own thoughts, I do my own stuff. But at the end of the day, every single one of us, regardless of who we are, where we live, where we're from, everybody on the face of the earth, just as people, we are very, very easily influenced. You don't believe me? Let me give an example. It is likely that you share, as I have, a hatred for pharmaceutical commercials. I hate all these drug commercials. I can't stand them for a variety of reasons, one of which is that they tend to be really long. And so when you're waiting on Final Jeopardy to come back around so that you can find out the answer, you've got to watch all these drug commercials. And most of them look kind of the same in terms of visual imagery. You've got these smiling faces and warm lighting, and everything looks so nice, and there's pleasant music playing in the background, and it's going on and on. You got this lengthy commercial, and at least the first half of it is talking about, these problems and how this particular medicine, it brings happiness and comfort, and it makes everything so good. But the real reason I can't stand them is because the back half of the length of that commercial is what? Side effects. And how many are there? They're like all of them. And what kind of side effects do you hear about? Well, again, you've got the scene set. Oh, it's smiling faces and beautiful places, and everything's going to be wonderful, except that you may wind up with thyroid cancer, and it's possible that your hair will fall out, and that your teeth will turn black, and that you're going to have crippling arthritis or explosive diarrhea or some just terrible litany of things. I mean, you hear these descriptions, and it's all this stuff, and it goes on and on and on and on and on. And you hear that, and you're like, man, who would want to take that stuff? I mean, listen to all that. I mean, I see the beautiful places and the smiling faces and all that stuff. Who in the world would, after hearing all that, who in the world would want to take that medicine? Didn't who apparently wants to take that medicine? Apparently we do. Because you know what happens? After seeing these commercials, apparently, we go to our doctors and say, you know what, I saw something on TV the other day. How about, could I try some of that? And apparently doctors are going along with this. Why do I say that? I say that because this is not hyperbole or exaggeration. These are just numbers I found this past week. 2018, pharmaceutical industry in the United States, consumer-targeted marketing. So I'm not talking about what they spend to target doctors and hospitals and all that stuff. Consumer-targeted advertising and marketing. How much was spent in the United States in just 1 year? $10 billion. $10 billion on print, radio, and video marketing. Here's the question. Would they spend that kind of money if it didn't work? No, they wouldn't. So even though we find these to be loathsome commercials and they get on our nerves, they go on forever, and you hear about all these terrible side effects, apparently what we're doing is we're going to our doctors and saying, hey, how about, I saw an ad about X. How about we try X? What does that remind us of? It reminds us of the fact that regardless of what we say, we are easily influenced. And with that in mind, Paul says, listen, guys, I want you to pay attention that there is known, flagrant, open, unrepentant sin in the fellowship, and that's a problem. Why? Because we are easily influenced. How can having known, flagrant, unrepentant sin in the life of the fellowship be a problem? It's because of this, that living for Jesus is tough. And among other things, it requires us using this word an awful lot. No. Do you remember what Jesus says? If any wants to follow me, let him deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me. What does that mean? It means that Michael has to say no an awful lot. And you know what? We don't like saying no. We don't like denying ourselves anything. And when we see someone that's not paying any attention to what God has said and they're living in known, flagrant, unrepentant sin, lightning bolts aren't crashing, and we're afraid to have any conversations, and it seems to be going okay. Bit by bit over time, what happens is that the bar gets lowered, and we, kind of like electricity, opt for the path of least resistance, and we think, okay, well, if that's okay for them, well, this is okay for me. And what we're doing is that we're minimizing, overlooking the great, significant power of influence. And when that happens, the wrong message goes out. The wrong message goes out. Let me ask you this, though. At the end of the day, you could say, well, what difference does it make what people are saying? Who cares what people are saying about us? Who cares if it's the wrong message? Whether it's, because people are going to talk, we know that. What difference does it make if people are going to talk? Pay attention, because I believe Paul answers that question. He says in this passage what should be done with this individual. He says that you should take this person and put them out of the fellowship. He says, turn them over to Satan for the judgment of the body, so that in the end their soul may be saved. What's he talking about? He's saying you put this person out of the protective umbrella of the blessing of the fellowship, let them and turn them over, liberate them to experience the full consequence of their sin. Because as we act in ways that are not pleasing to God, unfortunately, and that the reason God tells us not to do stuff is because He's trying to help us. Spare yourself this. We free them, we liberate them to experience the full fury of the consequences of their choices. And the hope is that somehow, some way, that God might use that in the end to get their attention so that one day they stand before the Lord and they do not hear this: "Depart from me, I never knew you." Why does the message that's coming out about the church matter? Ultimately because of this. People matter. People matter. You are, and people around us, we're all going to stand before the Lord one day. And for many, for entirely too many, that day's not going to end very well. And so it has to matter. It has to matter that the right message is going out. Not for our sake, not for our reputation, not because of our marketing, but because people matter, because eternity is at stake for people. Coming up in a month, I will have been here with you for 9 years. It's hard to believe. That was for us 3 children ago. That's how we measure time. I believe in many ways that this has been true, not simply in the time that I have been here, but even in the years preceding it. In fact, this church is 6 months older than I am, getting ready next month to turn 45 years old. In many ways, the story of Gate City has always been this: what could be? What could be? Look at where we're situated. We're situated around legions of people. We've got, in terms of facilities, we've got good, adequate facilities that are in good shape. We don't have any debt. We've got the best looking preacher in town. I heard no amens. Duly noted. We're in the middle of a community where we don't look completely different than our community. A lot of churches are facing that struggle. There are churches all across the country and around the world that would be just tripping over themselves to have the opportunities that we are afforded. And yet it seems that to this point, still the story of Gate City is what could be. What could be. What changes the story from what could be to what is? I think it begins to change when we discover and find our satisfaction in the things that really matter. It's not in having facilities or teams or ministries or anything. At the end of the day, it's doing what God has said, and that it matters more to us than anything that Christ is known through us, here, there, and everywhere. I really sincerely believe that the Lord is in the process of doing some stuff. I believe that God has been shuffling the deck. And I believe that we are best positioned to begin to experience what could and should be becoming a reality. But what will absolutely prevent that is this: when we value the stuff that doesn't ultimately matter. When the wrong message is going out. When we're proud of the wrong stuff. When we don't pay attention to the power of influence. So here's the question. Not for our sake, but for the Lord's sake, do you, not the person beside you, not your Sunday school class, not your family, do you want this to be a place? Do you want this to be a church family that does what God says and is useful in His hands, so that more than anything else, matters? When that gets there, when that becomes our reality, God will do significant things. The question is, do you want it? Will you bow your heads with me? As you've heard